the weight gain.
Yeah, I was waiting for the signal from that now. You got a much nicer background than me.
Who, me?
Yeah, your background's much nicer than mine.
Yeah, for now.
All right. Well, welcome to another edition of Uplifting Voices. My guest tonight is James Mackey, who's a national activist, social philanthropist, motivational speaker, community organizer, and a founder of a grassroots movement called Stuck on Replay, and also a graduate fellow of the Institute for Nonprofit Management and Leadership from Tufts University. So James, that's keeping you busy, huh?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely keeping me busy.
That's great. And I was just saying before we went live, I've seen you at, most major criminal justice reform, racial justice forums at the State House, at Suffolk University, out in the community over the past 4 or 5 years. And I truly appreciate your willingness to speak truth to power, to say to elected officials that, what we're doing is not enough, that the status quo is unacceptable, and, what we need to do to truly address racial injustice, systemic racism, and address white supremacy and the systems that really oppress Black and brown people in Massachusetts, but across the country. So I really, really appreciate and respect your work.
Appreciate you for your platform and for you even considering the recommendations and all of the, the conversations that we've had around the ills that have impacted Black and brown lives across the Commonwealth. So thank you for, all that you do.
My pleasure. And, I've been, I created the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus 5 years ago. We made some changes 2 years ago. But I tell you, even before the national protests came up around police brutality against Black Americans, there was just a real recognition that the State House has a lot more work to be done. The protests have led us to taking some action. But just curious if you can, there's so much great work you're doing, but how do you sort of see your work, and how did you start doing your work? How long have you been at this for?
Yeah, so I would call my work, so peace, thank you again for having me, and peace everybody that's watching. And, I would call my work, radical revolutionary work that goes against the status quo, systems that have been working effectively for white folks. And my job, I feel like, is to, inform, educate, and uplift the community to challenge the status quo, challenge systems that have oppressed us, and do something about it. And so with that, being a part of this process has definitely been challenging, from the whole legislative process, the whole just trying to engage with legislators. I can tell when people are real and not being real about what they will and will not do. I've been in numerous spaces and places where, I've never been afraid to hold people accountable for what they say that they would do and what they say that they won't do. And the reason being is because not only is it that my life is on the line, but I have children that will be living in this community, in this Commonwealth. And in order for them to live a productive and prosperous life, I have to make sure that I'm fighting for them, as well as any other person that looks like me who are not reaping the benefits of what we've built, in this country. So that's what I'm fighting for on a daily basis, and it's a struggle, but we have to do it and must do it.
And I know that you're doing, and I obviously I know you're working. You are based in Boston right now. Are you from Boston? Did you grow up in Boston?
Nah, so I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, by the way of Columbus, Ohio. And so, when my mom was, when I was 10 years old, My older brother, who was I think 4 to 5 years older than me, was jumped in high school. In eighth grade, he was going into ninth grade. He was jumped by a gang, and they broke his neck. And the school system, and so just to give you context, not only just in Massachusetts are systems, all the way messed up, but the school system in Chicago was actually going to send my brother in the same community where the gang like resided.
Mm.
And you know how it's set up is that if that's the school that they tell you have to go to, you have to go to that. There's no backing out. And so my mom decided to move us out of Chicago. And that was probably the best decision that my mom made for the benefit of our whole family. And I moved here to Boston 9 years ago and started my organizing on a local level to really challenge systems that have oppressed Black and brown.
Yeah, and I do want to ask about Chicago, but what is your experience in Boston, and what neighborhood are you in Boston?
So I lived in numerous places in Boston. I mean, as you know, for one, let me just start off by saying, for my work experiences, my skills, my accolades, I don't get paid enough than my counterparts do. Even with this consultant work that I do, I don't get paid enough, and I'm not valued enough to, live a livable wage in this Commonwealth. So let me start off with that first. So I've lived in, Somerville when I first moved here. Very interesting place. It's very nice, but very interesting. I lived in Quincy, Massachusetts, which is, to me, I believe, one of the most racist cities in the Commonwealth. I remember vividly, coming home late hours from work or what have you, or on the train, or just walking home and just hearing racial slurs consistently walking home. And I would have to, shuck it off and smile and just like play it like it didn't mean anything, but it definitely impacted my mental health. I lived in Dorchester, I lived in Roxbury, and I've been residing in Hyde Park for 4 years. So I lived all around, man. But I found Hyde Park to be my home for now, and it's been good for me.
Well, that is good. And what what is it like to be Black and living in Boston, over the past 5 to 10 years? What are the challenges? Are things opening up or improving or?
Yeah, so no, things are not improving. I think a lot of big events that may happen nationally as well as locally. There are opportunities where folks that have position of power who may feel like the work that they're doing in those moments are a job well done, but these are just band-aids that are put on a wound that's far too deep to heal. And that's interesting that you said that to me, because one of these questions that came up was a broad question in the conference that I had, was like, can all people heal? And I'm like, no. And then folks are like, well, why not? I'm like, well, if you have been a Black person living in this country, and in every which way you go, you're dehumanized, you look down upon, you have all these labels thrown upon you, and you try your best to live a righteous life or do what's best for your family and your community. You try to find meaningful opportunities to survive, yet and still to be turned away left and right. And so, to answer your question, how does it feel to be Black in the state of, in the Commonwealth? It feels the same as though anything hasn't changed since our existence being brought to this country. Laws, policies, practices, language, impacts the life of myself, my family, and my community. And every day I see how the micro and macro aggressions of folks that look like you, Senator, are continue to perpetuate Black lives and Black and brown people. And so, for instance, I mean, I was watching, the hearing today on the floor around the police, reform, and I seen representatives speak thanking everybody. Thank you for all the great work. I think that, I think that this bill is great, but I have an amendment. And that amendment, that language, that amendment, that language similar to loopholes that were created to go against Black lives, like the 13th Amendment, that does not allow that allows folks that are incarcerated to be used as slaves still, is the same type of like ideology, the same type of mindset that people still have to this day, even with the Black Lives Matter movement that has been going across this world. Right now, I just seen Boston Red Sox put a Black Lives Matter sign, and I think that that's great. Wow, and solidarity. But I also think that is a way for them to, be. It's all about corporations and really not people. The reason why I say that is because now they're hoping that corporations will, still be investing in, buying Red Sox tickets, or Black people buying Red Sox tickets because they have that, that logo or that sign up, and in solidarity. But we're right. It's just that. Yeah. But what does that really mean? You can say all of that. You can put all these posters, in your front yard, in your window. But if I was to come to you and to act, just to have a conversation, what have you, would you have microaggressions? Would you, if I was to be in your presence and one of your friends said a racial slur, would you say something to your friend? So that's what I'm really talking about, And so to going back to your question, being Black in the Commonwealth is very, very stressful, especially if you're conscious of what people are doing when they're doing it, and they act as though they're not doing anything that's racist or implicit or that's judgmental. But now they it's Black Lives Matter.
Absolutely. If I can I share some stories from my district that speak to that?
For sure.
So, first of all, you talk about, often it's called microaggression, but you talk about that trauma is just how, racism, more often than not by white people against Black people, and the trauma it causes. And I interviewed a number of young Black high school and college students from the Acton Boxbury area where I went to high school, and just talking about, white classmates, white teachers, questioning, I didn't know you were in the honors class. I didn't know that you played tennis, bringing up slavery in a way that didn't address the impact it would have in the classroom. And I have a number of my constituents that are sort of, progressive white activists, putting up all these Black Lives Matter signs. And I said, well, I appreciate that, but are you aware that the Senate and the House is debating a police reform racial justice bill? Are you having conversations with the local police chief about, their practices, about, shifting resources from the police to social resource, social human services? And more often than not, those conversations are not happening.
Exactly.
So that's a real problem.
So with that, that's a prime example, exactly what I'm talking about. I'm glad that you bring that up, because that's one of the things that I've been paying very close attention to since, the brother George Floyd was murdered by a white police officer, right? As well as Breonna Taylor. And no justice has happened with the police officer that has done that to Breonna Taylor. So with that, literally, that's what I'm talking about. So we need tangible examples of white folks. If you really believe that Black Lives Matter, I don't want you to hold up signs. I don't want you to protest, because those are something that you can just slap on the wrist, say, yeah, I did that. Yeah, I did. Well, we showed up for a protest, we put the signs up. Well, when legislation was on the floor, or while it was promoting, this bill, the shift pushing reform bill, is that
yep.
Right?
Shift and reform, yep.
Yeah, exactly. So when this was on the table, and your legislatures reached out to you, or if you knew it was on the table and you didn't show up, or you didn't call your legislature and talk to them, if you didn't call your police chiefs to talk to them about that, then what you did does not mean anything to me. It doesn't hold any value to me. It's just a slap on the wrist and say, hey, we did it. Well, Black people, I don't know what else to do for you. Because again, going back to the legislative process, it's very interesting to me, because this whole process is set up for me. I think it's against Black lives in general. I really do, because things take too long to push through. How many Black people are representing the legislation?
Yeah, very, very few. I mean, in the Senate, there are no Black legislators.
I know.
Yep. And in the House, there's, I think, 7 or 8. Yep.
Exactly. And so with that, they how much power and influence will they even have? Because you have to come to some agreement as a House as well as a Senate. And there's a whole bunch of other things that I can talk about as it relates to this process. But yet and still, going back to my initial point when I was talking to you about me watching like what's happening right now on the floor. These amendments that individuals that represent certain districts are putting on the floor are loopholes to support police, are loopholes to support their agendas, and is really not supporting Black lives, because otherwise they would vote yes on the bill as it stands, and without making these amendments or these changes that's beneficial to the police, or to white folks.
Absolutely. And I know before we went live, we were chatting a little bit about the process. And so you have this, national protest over the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. You have national protest, and suddenly there's, an action by the Senate and House to say, okay, we're going to do a racial justice police reform bill.
Right.
And I think the tough conversation is, at the State House, there are very few, Black lobbyists. There's very few, Black and brown people that have sort of positions of influence at the State House, not even talking about legislators. So how does sort of the voices of, the sort of average, if you will, Black and brown, residents and community leaders like yourself, how do you have an influence on the process, and what was your experience over the past 6 weeks?
Yeah. So I've been fortunate enough to be a part of the process where I've been fortunate enough to make a name for myself where folks in the State House know who I am. And I've been, so to be 100 with you, Senator, we have to disrupt the process, because the process does not work for us. We have to make as much noise, not only with just the protest, not only with just, screaming and hollering, but when it's time for this time right now to make these calls to, the senators and representatives around these bills, but also, when time comes around, like voting season, like now, we see exactly where these folks vote, or what they value. And we follow that. And it's a hard process to do that while trying to take care of your family during the pandemic, as well as making sure that you're still surviving, putting food on the table and clothes on the back for your children. But it's necessary. And I also do think that it plays a major role with the senators and representatives and the whole legislative process to really, share the process, because if we don't know the process, we will never find out the process unless we seek for it. I think that it's up to the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, legislators, the governor, the mayor, to talk about what the whole legislative body process is, so community members can be well informed on what needs to happen. For instance, if something happens on a city level, what needs to happen? What do you need to do? Who do you need to call? Who do you need to be in contact with if something happens on a state level? What does the legislative process look like? What power, influence, and leverage do you all have? What does the governor, what does the power, influence does the governor have? What does power, influence does the district attorney have? The governor's council have? All of these elected positions that people vote into, to represent them. I feel like we should know more about. And this should be more of an opportunity for community and constituents to learn. And that's what I've been trying to do. And over my past 2 events that to be truthful, Stuck on Replay had 2 years ago, it was specifically focused on around that. Like, who do you value? Speaking to all of the folks that were running for a specific position, whether it be from the federal, state, local, city, municipal level. We were wanting to know, who do you really value? Is it Black lives? Is it corporations? Is it white lives? Or who do you really value? And so that's
Mhm.
uh, where a lot of my work has been involved around. And again, with what I'm learning and what I'm doing, I'm trying my best to make sure that I inform folks of these processes and of the structures that are put in place to push legislation, to push policy, to push and to hold people accountable and disrupt systems that have been working effectively for the folks that it was built for.
Absolutely, and I've seen you at a lot of forums, doing just that. You've also created this grassroots movement, Stuck on Replay, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
If you could talk about, and I checked out the website. I love the pictures. I love the signs. Talk to me about Stuck on Replay and how you feel that's had an impact.
Yeah. So back in February 2016, there was an event that took place at the State House, and it was talking about the criminal justice system as it relates to young adults in the Commonwealth. And when I went in this space, there was only, I would say, 3 to 4 people that Black people that were in this space, and most of the people that they were talking about were young Black people. And so this was during a time frame when I was still working with young folks, and I was able to bring them along with me, and we challenged, the folks that led this event. And from that, we had a conversation with the organizers of the event. They said, well, what did we do wrong? What can we do to make things better? I say, well, you can host this event in our community, where we'll have people that represent those that are behind the walls, or have family members that are behind the walls, have their voices elevated. And so the start of Stuck on Replay was not only just me, it was a collaborative effort with numerous organizations across Boston and the Commonwealth, where, young folks were at the forefront, where we thought about how can we challenge systems that have us stuck on replay, and also get more community members to be engaged. And the idea of Stuck on Replay came about. And the work that Stuck on Replay has done, when it initially started, which was January 7th, 2016. I'm sorry, July 7th, 2016. We launched a movement to really elevate voices, uplift the community, and influence policymakers around policies that was impacting, Black and brown communities. And that's when the ominous bill was, or that's when the Council of State Government came to the state of Massachusetts, came to Massachusetts to do the research on, what's happening around the opioid crisis, and the reform that's like what should be happening in the prison systems of the Commonwealth. And that's where I'm like, well, I see that they're coming to speak to legislatures, but where's the community? Where's the community's voice? And that's where we're like, okay, in order for us to not be stuck on replay, we have to elevate the voices, uplift the community, and influence the policy. So we inform the community around, this is what's happening right now in the legislation. If you have anyone that has been incarcerated, a family member, what should you do about it and why? And so we captured numerous testimonies and stories and shared them with legislators. We also invited legislators, policymakers, and folks that were working on language that was in the ominous bill, to hear from the community. And so we brought legislators and community together, and we host numerous forums over the next 2 years until I think it was August. Our last event was August 2018. And that's where, again, that's when we were talking about, all right, we talked about the prison reform, right? And for the past 2 years, and we got a lot of traction around that, but now it's election time. So who do you really value? That's where we're like, okay, who do you really value? And this is where we brought the community to meet with people that were running for office. So why should we elect you to represent us on a city, state, and federal level? And so with that, I do believe that we have had an impact, but due to we weren't funded. It was myself, a number of organizers that were a part of it. But because we weren't funded, my capacity shifted to me finding meaningful employment so I can make sure that I can provide for my family. And so we took a major pause on Stuck on Replay, because, again, as an organization, grassroots, led by a Black man, really doing great work in the community, wasn't being funded, wasn't being supported enough to continue its services. And so we had to put it on a pause. And so we've actually been on a pause since August of 2018. However, we've done, presentations at certain events. I've spoken like I'm doing now. But other than that, the work of Stuck on Replay has been on pause because we don't have the capacity to continue to fight on that level, a statewide level, to move the work of justice forward.
Sure. So now, if I may ask, so now you've got this moment where the public, quite honestly, more white people are finally paying attention to police brutality issues. Putting aside whatever the legislature, puts before the governor's desk probably by next week on racial justice and police reform, what do you think needs to happen to truly educate, the white community about, police brutality, about systemic racism? How are we going to be, speaking as a white person, how are we going to be moved to better understand what sort of the typical Black resident experiences in Massachusetts?
Yeah, to be truthful, Senator, I think that there's been numerous examples of this that has shown up on social media, shown up in numerous news feeds, shown up in videos that show where a police officer was definitely wrong, in the wrong, and should be prosecuted to the fullest extent. There's numerous experiences that I can speak to that still would have folks that still wouldn't educate white folks, to be truthful. And that's just unfortunate because it's deeply rooted in the value systems of where people were brought up and how they were brought up. And so with that, I can't say that I can educate any white person on that piece, but I can say that what I would do is to challenge your thought process, to challenge your value system of where you are now in this present time and where you've been as it relates to the racial injustice that Black and brown people have dealt with since our existence in this country. And it's sad to say that we are still fighting. The fact that we have to still fight the trauma that we have to deal with, on a daily basis to fight. That's why people don't believe in this legislative process, because the system was not set up for them. And so, no, I don't think that there's any education that needs to be had, but I think that, again, challenging your thought process and your ideologies and your value systems to say, okay, something went wrong a long time ago, and the only way for it to be fixed, it starts with the same folks that messed it up. Even if it wasn't you, but it's your ancestors that you're reaping the benefits of that. And so what will you do now, knowing that legislation is happening right now and within a week from the governor making decisions? What will you do? Will you make those calls? Will you send emails? Or will you continue to just sit and just listen and not fully engage to the fullest extent to show that you truly believe that Black Lives Matter? What does that truly mean to you? And let that sit, not for too long, because we don't have too much time. The urgency is now for you to do something. And so what will you do?
Absolutely. And certainly, I'm learning about the things I need to do. One thing I just want to mention, because I think it'll be an action item that continues after next week, is that we had a bond bill for construction of state buildings, and originally there was money in there to build a new state prison, basically a new women's state prison. And so the Senate was successful to get language to prohibit any of that money going to a new prison. I'm hoping that that language will stay in the final bill. But even if it doesn't, I know that Governor Baker wants to build this prison, and that's going to be a longer effort to push back and say, if we're talking about taxpayer dollars, we want to be putting that money into the community for job training, for education, especially communities most impacted by mass incarceration. and not back into the Department of Corrections just to build more prisons for people across the state.
Right. Yeah, that within itself is very, very interesting to me. And this is a prime example of, to be truthful, racist and white supremacy. So you have the governor who's the executive chief of the state, right? Who would still like to build prisons off of the tax dollars of the constituents that he represents, you know, and I'm sure that if the constituents as a whole were to engage with this brother or with this man, they would disagree with that wholeheartedly. Not all, but most. And that is a prime example of this whole legislative process that we have to negotiate if we should build the prisons for women or if we should reinvest that into communities that definitely are in dire need of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are more conversations happening on many bills about, you know, money being reinvested into communities that have been neglected for far too long. So I think the question is, you know, how should that money be used, and also making sure that Black and brown communities are making the decisions about how that money is spent.
Yeah. And sorry to interrupt, but with that, right? So folks that don't look like me have relationships with senators, representatives, and corporations that fund these foundations that fund all of that, right? On a federal level and all of that. They have relationships with legislatures that can write, you know, earmarks, you know, for their organization. You also have lobbyists who are, you know, for corporations and so on and so forth. My point being is that we as Black people don't have the relationships with folks that have the power and influence and money to fluctuate and pass the money through our communities. And so we are already at a deficit there. And so to educate white folks, right? If you have a corporation or organization you're watching and you're finding loopholes to find money that could be divested or invested into communities of color, don't take the money. If you have enough wealth that can support yourself, your family, your next generation, or what have you, right? But we know the statistics around the wealth of a Black person in Massachusetts worth $8, and you know, white folks, the median income is 250,000 plus, right? So if we know that, not only that, then we should think strategically, or we should say, you know what, that's completely wrong. And I think that something needs to be done with that. In order for Black lives to truly matter, we're also talking about economic mobility. And so if there's bills or if there's funding that's coming through the federal, state, or local level, and I know that I can receive that because I have relationships with so-and-so, I'm not even going to go for that because that's not even right. I'm going to actually advocate that it go to the communities of color that's definitely in dire need of it and could definitely use those resources and that funding on all levels.
Absolutely. And so a lot of those conversations are happening now. Anything else that you think that the legislature or, you know, people in power should be looking at to address systemic racism at this point, outside of police, outside of the prison or judicial system? Are there other things we should be focused on?
Yeah, I mean, if you have enough time, there's a bill right now, House Bill 1440, and it's a bill to construct a bill around structural racism. And it's a bill that Representative Holmes filed, but Representative Nika brought it back. Elgardo, I think I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, but she wrote some amendments to it. So that's one bill, 1440, House Bill 1440. Push that through legislation. It's around structural racism. So if you want to do something that is building a commission to address structural racism within the injustice system and other systems, that's one bill. Push that through the House. The other bill is so I do a lot of work right now around, Black men and boys. And so there's a bill right now that Representative China Tyler has in legislation. It's House Bill 168. That's a bill that's extremely important right now. It's a permanent commission to construct the social status of Black men and boys. And again, if you believe in Black lives, then you know that the impact of of Black men and boys is detrimental because of the lack of numerous resources and opportunities and the socioeconomic statuses that we deal with on a daily basis. It's impacting Black men and boys as well as our women and children. And so that's one bill I think that is important. And just to be clear, it's not just a study. It will be action items that will come out of that, and it's permanent. So we would hold organizations, corporations, individuals, institutions accountable if there's anything that is impacting Black men and boys negatively. And so that's extremely important that we push that bill, and make sure that this shift reform bill is pushed through legislation into the governor's desk. We need the governor to sign on to it without any amendments. I mean, are you for Black lives or are you not? That's just as simple as that.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I think what I truly respect about you is your understanding the legislative process and sort of what can get done now, while also, again, speaking truth to power and making sure that elected officials, are held accountable, and that there's so much more we need to be doing for every community, including Black and Brown communities. So thank you so much for coming on to Uplifting Voices. It's always great to speak to you. I haven't seen you for a while, so thanks for coming on the show.
I appreciate you, Senator Eldridge, for this platform, for the work that you're pushing, not only just in your district, but across the Commonwealth, and really elevating the voices of folks like myself to hopefully ignite some information into your constituents as well as your viewers, to hopefully challenge them to think differently about their actions and their decisions around policies impacting Black and Brown lives.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Encourage all listeners to reach out to me, and thank you, James, and thanks everyone for watching Uplifting Voices. Appreciate it.
For sure. Peace.